The war began without warning and without mercy. In the cold emptiness of space, fleets clashed in silent violence. Planets burned, cities turned to dust, and entire civilizations vanished from the star charts. Among those who suffered was the Nyvara species, a once proud race known for their unmatched beauty and wisdom. Their numbers fell from billions to a scattered handful, and among the survivors stood the last female born of pure Nyvara blood, Nyvara, heir to a culture now teetering on extinction. Nyvara's beauty was spoken of like legend even in her own time. Emerald skin shimmered faintly under any light, her violet hair flowing like silk in zero gravity, and her golden eyes carried both the pain of loss and the sharpness of a warrior's will. She was not a queen by title, yet the galaxy treated her as one. Many suitors came from distant systems, each offering fleets, treasures, or alliances. All were turned away. Nyvara refused them all, not out of arrogance, but because none could meet her standards of courage and heart. In the final days of the Nyvara exodus, her people fled toward the Orion Rift, chased by mercenary fleets. It was there, in the shadows of broken moons, that fate took an unexpected turn. A human vessel, a single frigate far smaller than any warship, emerged from hyperspace into the middle of the chase. Its captain was not a prince or a fleet commander, but a decorated soldier from Earth, known only as Kale Voss. He had come not for politics or fortune, but because a distress signal had reached him from a Nyvara scout ship. Kyle's arrival was almost suicidal. His ship was outgunned. His crew was tired from weeks of fighting, and yet he dove straight into the chaos. With daring maneuvers, his frigate split the enemy formation and bought the Nyvara ships the precious minutes they needed to escape into the rift. Nyvara watched this unfold from her command deck, her hands gripping the rail as if she could feel every pulse of the human's ship through her own body. No one had ever risked so much for her people without demanding something in return. When the battle ended, the surviving Nyvara fleet limped toward a remote moon for repairs. Kyle's frigate followed, smoke still curling from its hull. Nyvara stepped out onto the docking platform when his ship landed. She had been told humans were physically unremarkable compared to other species. Yet the man who walked down that ramp carried himself like a force of nature. His uniform was scorched, his jaw shadowed with days of exhaustion, and his eyes, sharp and unyielding, met hers without flinching. She felt an unfamiliar spark in her chest. Kale didn't bow or deliver flowery greetings. He simply said, "You called for help," I answered. It was not pride, not arrogance, just truth. Nyvara studied him in silence, trying to decide if this man was reckless or simply fearless. Most who approached her looked for approval or admiration. Kyle seemed to care for neither. He cared only that lives had been saved. That alone set him apart from every suitor she had turned away before. The Nyvara Council, reduced to a handful of elders, thanked Kale formally and offered him rare artifacts in gratitude. He refused them without hesitation, saying his crew needed supplies, not treasures. That refusal stirred whispers among the Nyvara, who could not remember a time when someone had denied such an offer. Nyvara listened from the shadows, her gaze fixed on the man who had, in one act, challenged everything she thought she knew about loyalty and courage. That night, the Nyvara camp was quiet, lit only by the faint glow of portable lamps. Nyvara walked alone along the rocky edge of the moon, her mind restless. Every suitor before Kale had promised her safety in exchange for obedience or alliance. Kale had risked his life without asking for her hand or her people's allegiance. It made her wonder if perhaps the last hope of her species did not lie with a prince of the stars, but with a champion from a distant blue world called Earth. The next morning, the Nyvara camp was already alive with quiet activity. Engineers worked on damaged ships, guards patrolled the perimeter, and the few children played in silence near the shelters. Nyvara emerged from her tent, her armor gleaming faintly in the soft light of the moon. Her eyes searched the camp until they found Kyle, standing beside his crew as they unloaded crates of supplies. His posture was steady, his voice calm as he gave orders, and there was no trace of self-importance in the way he moved. She walked toward him, her presence drawing the eyes of nearby Nyvara. Kyle turned to face her, his gaze steady as always. "Your ships will need more shielding before you try another jump," he said plainly. Nyvara raised an eyebrow. "And you know this from fighting in a single battle?" Kyle didn't flinch at her tone. "I know it from surviving too many." She expected him to smile, to soften the exchange, but he didn't. He simply returned to the work at hand, leaving her to consider the weight of his words. Later, the council summoned both of them to a meeting in the largest structure they had. Inside, the air was tense. The elders debated their next course of action, whether to hide deeper in the rift or try to reach allied systems. Kyle listened in silence, arms crossed, until one elder turned to him and asked for his opinion. His answer was short. "If you run, they'll chase you. If you fight, you choose the place and the time." The bluntness silenced the room. Nyvara could see the truth in his statement, but she also saw the fear it stirred. When the meeting ended, Nyvara found herself walking beside Kale outside. The cold air carried the faint scent of fuel and burned metal. She asked him why he had come so far from Earth for people he didn't know. He didn't hesitate. "Because someone has to," he said. "And because I can." There was no grand speech, no attempt to impress her. Just a man stating a fact, as if the decision had been as simple as breathing. She realized then that he measured worth not in titles or lineage, but in actions. Over the next 2 days, Kale and his crew worked alongside the Nyvara to repair their ships. He handled dangerous tasks without hesitation, climbed into engine bays, and taught Nyvara engineers human methods of reinforcing armor. Nyvara watched from a distance at first, but slowly found herself drawn into conversations with him. She noticed how he treated everyone, whether elder, soldier, or child, with the same quiet respect. For a people used to suitors who spoke only to gain her favor, this was something entirely new. One evening, as the repairs neared completion, Nyvara invited Kale to walk with her beyond the camp's lights. The jagged cliffs around them were bathed in silver from the twin moons above. She told him of the Nyvara's fall, of the battles lost, and of the suitors who had promised salvation only to demand control. Kyle listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When she finished, he said, "Then you already know why I'm different. I'm not here to claim you. I'm here to stand beside you." The words struck deeper than she expected. Back at camp, whispers began to spread. Some Nyvara believed the human's presence was a distraction. Others thought he might be the only hope left. Nyvara knew the council would soon pressure her to decide whether Kale was to be trusted. She also knew that once her mind was set, she would not waver. In the privacy of her tent, she turned over every memory of him in her thoughts. The first sight of his ship charging into battle, the calm way he faced her questions, the steadiness of his resolve. She had never seen these qualities in any other. The following morning, enemy scouts were spotted on the far side of the rift. The warning came just as Kale was preparing his crew to leave. Nyvara found him at the docking platform and told him of the threat. He didn't waste time with questions. "Then we fight here," he said. She stared at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "If we fight here, we risk losing everything," she warned. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. "If we run again, you lose more than ships. You lose who you are." For the first time, Nyvara didn't have an answer. The decision to fight was not made in the council chamber, but on the cold steel of the docking platform. Kyle stood with a datapad in hand, marking possible choke points around the moon's jagged cliffs. Nyvara joined him, her arms crossed as she studied the plan. He explained how the terrain could be used to force the enemy into narrow passages where their numbers would matter less. She listened, weighing every word, noting how his mind worked with the precision of someone who had Faced worse odds before, Kale gathered both his crew and Nyvara warriors together in a single formation briefing. He spoke without grandeur, focusing on what needed to be done. Shields reinforced here, turrets placed there, patrols running in shifts to avoid exhaustion. Lysera noticed how the warriors leaned forward when he talked, their doubts slowly replaced by determination. She realized he had a gift for cutting away fear and replacing it with purpose, and that this was not something learned in a palace or council seat. As the preparations unfolded, Lysera found herself working alongside Kale more than she had expected. He showed her how to adapt human pulse rifles for Nyvara hands, and she taught him the quick strike maneuvers used by her people in close combat. Their conversations were short, practical, and yet beneath them ran an unspoken current. Every time their hands brushed while passing tools or weapons, she felt a flicker of something she couldn't name. It was not the shallow spark of Suitor's past, but something deeper and far more dangerous. On the second night, scouts returned with clearer numbers of the enemy force. 3 cruisers, 24 smaller craft, and an unknown number of ground troops. The Nyvara elders called for retreat. Fearing annihilation, Kyle countered instantly, laying out how their ambush could cripple the lead cruiser before the others arrived. His voice carried no desperation, only certainty. Lysera stood beside him in the debate, lending her own authority to his strategy. For the first time, the council voted to stand and fight. With the decision made, the camp turned into a war machine. Kyle oversaw turret placements while Lysera moved among the warriors, lending encouragement and correcting stances during training drills. She saw how the human never asked for recognition and never hesitated to take the hardest assignments himself. More than once, she caught herself watching him instead of the task at hand. And each time, she reminded herself that a leader could not afford distraction in the shadow of war. On the eve of battle, Kale found Lysera alone on the ridge above the camp. The moons lit her armor in silver, her violet hair moving in the faint wind. He stopped a few steps away. "Tomorrow will be hard," he said. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the stars. "It always is." Silence settled between them, heavy but not unwelcome. Then he said, "No matter what happens, I'm glad I answered your signal." The words caught her off guard, and before she could think, she replied, "And I'm glad it was you who came." That night, the camp barely slept. Engines hummed softly as ships stayed on standby, and warriors sharpened their blades or checked their rifles for the 10th time. Kale walked the perimeter, speaking briefly with each guard. Lysera did the same on the opposite side of the camp. When they met halfway, neither spoke, but they shared a look that said more than any words could. In that moment, they were not commander and outsider. They were allies bound by the same risk. As dawn broke, the enemy ships appeared as dark shapes against the pale sky. The camp shifted into full readiness. Kyle moved to his position by the forward guns, while Lysera took command of the ground forces. The first shots rang out, bright lances of energy cutting the air. The battle for the last hope of the Nyvara had begun, and in the heart of it stood a human champion and the woman who had once sworn to give her trust to no one. The first wave hit harder than expected. Enemy dropships roared through the thin atmosphere, unloading squads of armored soldiers onto the rocky ground. Kyle's forward guns opened fire, blasting the lead formation before they could reach cover. Lysera directed her warriors from a fortified ridge, her voice steady through the comms. She could see Kyle from her vantage point, moving between gun crews, adjusting aim, and firing alongside his men. He fought like someone who had no interest in surviving unless his allies did as well. The enemy pressed forward, their heavy infantry advancing under the cover of portable shields. Lysera ordered her archers to target the shield carriers, while Kyle's team launched explosive rounds to shatter their formations. The combined tactic worked, breaking the enemy line and forcing them into the narrow passages Kyle had planned for. The sound of energy weapons echoed off the cliffs, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. Still, the enemy's numbers were overwhelming, and each victory cost more than they could spare. Midway through the battle, a warning came from the west flank. A squad of enemy soldiers had breached a secondary defense line. Lysera didn't hesitate. She left her command post, rallying a group of warriors to intercept them. The fight was brutal and close quarters, her blade moving with deadly precision as she cut through the invaders. In the chaos, she caught sight of Kale arriving with a small team, his rifle barking bursts of fire that dropped their attackers in seconds. For a moment, their eyes met before they turned back to the fight. By the time the enemy was forced back from the west flank, the ground was littered with scorched armor and smoking craters. Kyle moved to Lysera's side, checking her for injuries, without a word. She waved him off, but the concern in his eyes lingered. "We can't hold like this forever," she said. Kyle glanced toward the horizon where the cruiser still hovered. "We don't need forever. Just long enough to make them decide it isn't worth it." His voice was calm, but she could hear the strain beneath it. The battle shifted again when the largest enemy cruiser began its descent. Its shadow fell across the ridge, and a low rumble shook the ground. Kyle barked orders for every heavy weapon to focus fire on its landing struts. The sky lit up with streaks of plasma, and explosions rippled across the cruiser's hull. Still, it kept coming, its cannons tearing through the ridge defenses. Lysera's forces scattered to avoid the bombardment, but she held her ground, refusing to retreat until Kale's voice over the comm ordered her to fall back. They regrouped. At the central stronghold, a reinforced structure built into the side of a cliff. The enemy was closing in from multiple directions, and the defenders were down to their last reserves. Kyle moved through the stronghold, checking every gun and speaking briefly with each fighter. Lysera could feel the exhaustion in her people, but she also saw how his presence steadied them. Even in the face of certain defeat, his voice carried the weight of someone who had already decided they would not break. As the enemy prepared for a final push, Kale gathered the remaining leaders in the stronghold's command room. He proposed a high-risk counterattack aimed at destroying the enemy's command unit. Without their leadership, the invading force might lose cohesion and retreat. Lysera listened as he outlined the plan. Realizing it required him to lead a small strike team directly into the heart of the enemy formation, she felt a sharp knot in her chest, but said nothing until the others had left the room. "You may not come back from this," she told him. He met her gaze without flinching. "If it means you and your people survive, it's worth it." When the signal came, Kale's strike team moved out under the cover of heavy fire from the stronghold. Lysera stood at the command post, watching their blips on the tactical display creep closer to the enemy command unit. Every second felt longer than the last, and each time one of the markers blinked out, she felt the loss like a physical blow. But Kyle's signal kept moving forward, pressing deeper into enemy lines, refusing to stop until the objective was in sight. The strike team pushed forward through fire and smoke, each step bringing them closer to the enemy's command hub. Kyle led from the front, his rifle firing in short controlled bursts, cutting down any soldier who moved to block their path. Around him, the remaining members of his team fought with equal determination, but the pressure was relentless. Every corridor and ridge seemed designed to slow them down, and the enemy's resistance grew fiercer the deeper they went. Back at the stronghold, Lysera kept her attention fixed on the tactical display. She relayed updates to the defensive lines, while tracking Kyle's position. Her heart pounded with each flicker of movement from his signal. She had faced war before, but never had the fate of her people rested so heavily on one person's success. Every instinct in her told her to join him. Yet she knew abandoning the command post would throw the defense into chaos. Kyle's team finally reached the outer perimeter of the enemy command hub. The structure was heavily shielded, with multiple layers of automated turrets and guard units. He ordered his squad to spread out, drawing fire and creating gaps in the defenses. Moving low and fast, he planted explosive charges at key points. Each detonation shook the ground, ripping holes in the enemy's protective barrier. Still, the closer they came to the central core, the heavier the opposition became. Inside the stronghold, enemy artillery fire shook the walls. Lysera steadied herself against the control table as alarms blared across the comms. Reports came in of defensive lines falling back, but she held her ground, refusing to send reinforcements away from the central defense. If Kale's mission failed, no amount of fallback positions would matter. She found herself silently willing him forward, her focus narrowing to the single blinking icon that marked his location. The final approach to the command hub was a brutal exchange of fire. Kale moved with sharp precision, taking cover behind debris, returning fire in calculated bursts. His armor bore scorch marks, and his breathing grew heavier over the comms. But his voice stayed steady as he directed his squad. One by one, they broke through the last line of defenders until the command hub stood before them, its reinforced doors sealed tight. Kyle placed the last of his explosives and signaled for the team to fall back. The explosion ripped the doors apart in a blinding flash, sending shockwaves through the surrounding area. Kyle charged inside, followed by the survivors of his squad. The interior was a maze of control consoles and reinforced bulkheads. At the center stood the enemy commander, surrounded by elite guards. Without hesitation, Kyle fired, dropping the nearest guard before engaging the rest in a fierce exchange. The sound of battle inside the hub was sharp and chaotic, but it ended with Kale standing over the commander's fallen form. The moment the command unit went offline, the effect rippled across the battlefield. Enemy formations faltered. Their fire grew sporadic, and units began to retreat in disorder. From the stronghold, Lysera gave the order for her warriors to push forward. Cheers rose over the comms as the defenders reclaimed lost ground. Even so, her eyes remained on the display, waiting for confirmation that Kyle was still alive. When his signal began moving back toward friendly lines, she exhaled in relief. Kyle emerged from the smoke sometime later, his armor battered, and his expression unreadable. Lysera met him at the stronghold entrance, walking past the cheering warriors who lined the path. She stopped in front of him, her gaze locking with his. "You did it," she said quietly. He shook his head slightly. "We did it." In that moment, she understood that he would never claim the victory as his alone, and that was why she had begun to see him as something more than just Earth's champion. The battlefield was quiet now, the sound of weapons replaced by the low hum of damaged ships and the soft voices of survivors. The enemy had fully withdrawn, leaving behind wreckage and smoldering craters. Lysera moved through the camp, checking on her warriors, offering words of pride and thanks. Yet her mind kept returning to the man who had led the strike that turned the tide. She found Kyle near the edge of the landing zone, speaking with his crew as they unloaded what supplies remained. When she approached, Kyle looked up, his face marked by exhaustion, but his posture still unbroken. "How many casualties?" she asked. His jaw tightened before he answered. "Too many, but fewer than it could have been." She nodded, sensing the weight behind his words. He was not celebrating the victory the way others did. For him, survival always came with the burden of those who had not made it back. She realized then that his strength did not come from ignoring loss, but from carrying it and moving forward anyway. Later that day, the Nyvara Council convened to discuss their next steps. The elders spoke of relocating deeper into the rift to rebuild, while others suggested forming a permanent alliance with Earth. When Kale was asked for his opinion, he simply said, "Whatever you decide, make sure it protects your people first." There was no attempt to push Earth's interests or demand repayment. Lysera noticed the surprise in the faces of the elders, who were used to outsiders seeing their situation as a bargaining chip. As the meeting ended, Lysera caught up with Kyle outside the council hall. "You could have asked for anything," as she said. "They would have given it to you." Kale shrugged slightly. "I didn't come here to collect favors. I came because you needed help." The simplicity of his words struck her again. In her world, help almost always came at a price. She began to understand that this man's principles were as unshakable as the steel in his voice. In the days that followed, The Nyvara repaired their ships and reinforced their defenses with techniques Kyle's crew had shared. The camp began to feel less like a place of desperation and more like a fortress. Nyvara often found herself walking with Kyle through the repaired corridors, discussing strategies for the future. Each conversation revealed more about him, not just the soldier, but the man who carried stories of Earth's wild storms, deep oceans, and cities that glittered under the night sky. One evening, under the glow of the twin moons, Nyvara brought Kale to a high cliff overlooking the camp. The air was cool, and the sky stretched endlessly above them. She told him of the traditions of her people, of how the last female of her line was expected to choose a mate not for love, but for the security of the Nyvara's survival. Kyle listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, she said softly, "I have turned away every suitor because none of them saw me. They only saw what I could give them." Kale was silent for a moment before answering. "And what do you think I see?" She met his eyes and found no trace of greed or ambition there. "I think you see a person," she said. He nodded once. "Then you're right." The wind moved gently between them, carrying with it the unspoken understanding that had grown since the day he appeared in her fight. It was not yet a promise, but it was the foundation of one. The following morning, Kale's ship was ready to depart. His crew worked quickly, preparing for the journey back to Earth. Nyvara stood on the platform, watching him issue final orders. She knew the Council would ask her to make a decision soon, whether to accept the alliance with Earth or remain independent. She also knew her choice would not be based solely on politics. For the first time in her life, she was considering what she wanted, not just what her people expected. The day of Kyle's departure began with a quiet tension in the air. The Nyvara camp was alive with movement as ships lifted off for patrols and engineers carried out final inspections. Nyvara walked through the activity, her mind heavy with the choice that lay before her. She had been trained from birth to put her people before herself, but Kale's presence had shown her another truth. That survival was not only about strength, but about who stood beside you when the odds were against you. Kyle was at the loading bay when she found him, checking cargo manifests and reviewing flight plans with his crew. He looked up at her approach, his expression steady but lacking the guardedness she had seen when they first met. "I was going to say goodbye," he said. Nyvara tilted her head slightly. "You still can, but I may not let you leave so easily." His brow furrowed in faint surprise, but he didn't press for an explanation. Instead, he simply waited for her to speak. Before she could say more, a council runner arrived, summoning Nyvara to an emergency meeting. Kyle followed her to the council hall, where the elders reported new intelligence. Enemy forces had regrouped and were massing near the rift. It was possible they intended to strike again before the Nyvara could fully recover. The council debated whether to flee or fight, but the argument circled without resolution. Nyvara listened, her eyes flicking toward Kyle, knowing his opinion would carry weight with the warriors. When Kale finally spoke, the room fell silent. "My running now only tells them you're afraid. They'll keep coming until you make it cost them more than they're willing to pay." His voice was calm, but it carried the steel of certainty. Several elders shifted uncomfortably, unused to hearing strategy delivered without deference to rank. Nyvara added her own voice, supporting Kale's plan for a preemptive strike before the enemy could bring their full force. The council did not agree easily, but in the end, they voted to act. After the meeting, Nyvara caught up with Kyle in the corridor. "You realize that by staying, you've tied your fate to mine," she said. Kale gave her a faint smile. "I decided that the moment I jumped into your fight." She searched his face for the hint of a joke, but found only sincerity. That single statement confirmed what she had begun to suspect, that Kale's loyalty was not bound by orders from Earth or any political gain. It was something far more personal. The next 2 days were spent in preparation. Kyle trained Nyvara warriors in human shock assault tactics, while Nyvara coordinated fleet maneuvers. Their partnership had become seamless, each anticipating the other's needs without having to speak them aloud. Those who had once doubted the human now looked to him with the same trust they gave Lysera. The bond between them had grown into something visible, unspoken yet undeniable, and it did not go unnoticed by the council or the warriors. On the eve of the strike, Lysera stood with Kyle on the observation deck of the stronghold, watching the stars beyond the rift. "If we succeed tomorrow, my people will be free from this threat for a long time," she said. Kyle nodded. "And if we fail?" She turned to him, her golden eyes unwavering. "Then we fall together." His answer was a quiet nod, and in that silence, they both understood that the next day would decide not only the fate of the Nyvara, but the future of the connection they had forged. That night, the camp did not rest. Engines remained warm, weapons fully loaded, and crews ready to move at a moment's notice. Lysera moved among her people, offering strength through her presence. Kyle did the same with his crew, his voice low but commanding as he reminded them why they fought. From opposite ends of the camp, they shared a final glance across the dim light, a silent acknowledgement that whatever came at dawn, they faced it as one. Dawn broke over the rift with a cold, pale light. The Nyvara fleet moved into position, their ships gliding silently through the jagged asteroid fields that formed the outer edge of their hidden territory. Kyle's frigate took the lead, its reinforced hull showing every scar of the last battle. Lysera's flagship followed close behind, her warriors ready for the strike. There was no ceremonial speech, no grand farewell, only the shared understanding that this fight would decide everything. The enemy fleet emerged on the horizon, dark shapes blotting out the stars. They advanced in tight formation, their confidence clear in every movement. Kyle's voice came over the comms, sharp and precise, directing the Nyvara ships into flanking positions. Lysera relayed the commands to her captains, watching the formation take shape. The trap they had planned together was dangerous, but it was the only chance they had to end the threat before it consumed them. The first exchange of fire lit the void in bursts of white and blue. Kyle's frigate darted between the asteroids, drawing the enemy cruisers into the narrowest part of the rift. Lysera's fleet closed in from both sides, their weapons striking in coordinated volleys. The enemy's larger ship struggled to maneuver in the tight space, just as Kyle had predicted. Each explosion shook the battlefield, but the enemy pressed forward, determined to break the line. At the center of the chaos, Kyle's ship targeted the enemy flagship. It was a massive vessel, bristling with weapons and shielded by heavy armor. Every hit they landed was answered with a barrage that rattled the frigate from bow to stern. Lysera's own flagship joined the assault, her voice calm over the comms as she directed her gunners to strike at weak points in the enemy's defenses. Together, their fire began to peel away the layers of protection around the enemy commander. Thunder. Battle raged for hours, each side trading blow for blow. The Nyvara losses were heavy, but their resolve did not break. Kyle pushed his crew harder, refusing to let the enemy regain momentum. At one critical moment, the enemy flagship turned its full attention toward Lysera's ship, unleashing a devastating salvo. Kyle moved without hesitation, steering his frigate into the line of fire, absorbing the damage meant for her. The impact rocked his vessel, but it stayed in the fight. Lysera's heart pounded as she realized what he had done. She ordered her gunners to concentrate all fire on the enemy's exposed command tower. Kyle's crew joined in, their shots precise and unrelenting. The combined assault tore through the flagship's hull, igniting a chain reaction that consumed the vessel in a blinding explosion. The sight of their leader's ship destroyed sent shockwaves through the enemy fleet, and their formations began to collapse. With the enemy retreating in disarray, the Nyvara and Kyle's crew pressed their advantage. Smaller skirmishes broke out across the battlefield, but the larger threat had been shattered. By the time the last enemy ship fled into the void, the rift was quiet again. The defenders had won, but the cost was written in the wreckage that drifted silently among the asteroids. Lysera's voice carried over the comms, steady but edged with emotion, as she ordered the survivors to regroup. When Kyle's frigate docked with the flagship, Lysera was waiting. His armor was scorched, his movement slowed by exhaustion. But his eyes still held the same steady fire. She stepped forward, placing her hand over his. "You have given my people more than survival," she said. "You've given them a future." Kyle shook his head slightly. "You gave them that? I just stood beside you." She smiled faintly, knowing that for the first time in her life, she had found someone she could trust not because of duty, but because of who he was. In the days that followed, the council offered Kale riches, titles, and the honor of becoming a permanent guardian of the Nyvara. He refused them all, saying only that his place was where he was needed most. But when Lysera stepped forward and asked him to stay, her voice carrying both the weight of her people and the quiet hope of something more, he gave his answer without hesitation. "Then I will stay," he said, and the decision was final.